Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for today's Small Business Boot Camp. I'm Robert Theobald, Small Business Ombudsman and Vice President of Small Business Services here at the Arizona Commerce Authority. And as you can tell, I got my festive giant elf shirt on today, so I'm the Jolly Green Elf for today's session, bringing some holiday cheer. We got a great session today. We're going to jump in and start. First, I want to just get everybody that's here to post in the chat where you're tuning in from. We like to see where everybody's from and see what parts of the state or other states we have visitors from. So post up in the chat. All right, welcome from Show Low, downtown Phoenix, Scottsdale, Thatcher, EAC, thank you, Tori, Tucson, from California in Avondale for 7 years. All right, thank you. Tell your friends in California they can join too. Prescott, Lake Powell, Page. Surprise, surprise, surprise. All right, we got anybody from Yuma down in the corner over there? Hopefully we'll have somebody on soon. We got a good range of people from all over the state. Happy to have you with us today. So as we get started here, for those that have not been with the boot camp before, I'd like to start by recognizing all of our community partners. We cannot do these webinars without them, their time, their effort, and their expertise. We've got, this is just a sample of our partners that have presented, and we're grateful for them. Also, the Small Business Boot Camp is designed to help small businesses prepare, plan, and grow. And we do that through a number of ways. One is our weekly webinar that's every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. And then we also do some other workshops and webinars and things to help support that. One of those pieces is our content library. In the content library is we house all of our webinars. We record them and we post them in the content library, so those that can't make it live, or if you want to go back and refer to one you saw previously, you can go to the content library at no cost, watch the recording, download the slide deck, and get that information. So it's a great resource. As you see on the screen, it says 250 plus. We actually have over 300 webinars in there that you can access. And to help make it a little bit easier to find the sessions, we have 7 different categories you can choose from to narrow it down a bit. Some other resources and programs we have that support small businesses is our Career Readiness Credential, the Arizona Innovation Challenge, Arizona MEP, the Arizona State Trade Expansion Program, the Arizona Work, and then our small business services that I oversee. You can find all these programs and more details on them at the website listed below. If you go to azcommerce.com, you'll see a tab across the top that says programs, and it will take you to all these, plus a lot of other ones that we run here at the ACA. Another program that we have that's very important is the Small Business Checklist. And this is an interactive online resource that helps entrepreneurs or businesses looking to grow and scale identify the commonly requested licensing, registration, and compliance needs at the local, state, and federal level. You can also find other information on business planning, procurement, marketing, etc. on the checklist. There's 2 parts to the checklist. There's the main checklist website that houses a ton of information. It's a long list. You check the box and you'll get that information. Or you can go to our chat bot. If you scan that QR code with your phone, it'll take you to a mobile version of the chat bot, which is Sally. Sally's our virtual assistant, our state and local licensing information assistant that will summarize some of the key points in there to help you identify the information that you might be looking for regarding your business. So it's a great resource. We encourage everybody to take a look at it. And if you do go on and leverage Sally, again, our virtual assistant, feel free to provide feedback at the end of that chat session because we want to help Sally be better each time somebody uses it. So a great resource. Some other resources we have are some small business updates we want to share. First is preparing for the new year. There's 2 really good articles hosted on the SCORE website. SCORE is a program through the SBA, the Small Business Administration, and we work closely with the SCORE offices in Arizona. And there are two great articles. We're going to post the links for those in the chat, so you don't have to go searching for them. I saw those great for wrapping up the year and going into the new year. And then we're also going to share a link to the IRS's website. There are two big announcements that they had on the 1099-K delay, as well as the business tax credit page. So there's some great information on the IRS as you're looking at your taxes. So want to take a look at those programs. So with that, let's look at our upcoming sessions. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we do the webinars every week, every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. However, we do take occasional breaks here and there. So we are going to take a couple weeks off for the holidays as people take vacation and other things. And we're going to start back on January 9th. And you're going to see on here, we have part 1, part 2, and part 3. We have a great 3-part series provided by Nicole Zeno of Clever Cow Media. Great presenter. She's been on with us before. This is a great 3-part session. However, you can also just attend the individual ones based on the topics that might be interested. So she's developed it in a great way. It's going to be an awesome start to 2024 with these 3 sessions. Additionally, in January, and we have some special sessions that we do that are not on the Tuesday morning, but you'll see on Wednesday, January 17th at 9 a.m., there's a new requirement from the federal government, from the Department of Treasury Financial Crimes Enforcement Network called FinCEN. It's called Beneficial Ownership Information. And this really impacts small businesses. It impacts every business. And so you want to join us to understand that requirement. It's new. It starts on January 1st. It impacts existing small businesses and also small businesses going to start. So please join us for that. We're going to have the SBDC with us, and we are working with Snell and Wilmer Law Firm to have one of their legal experts on there as well. And then on Thursday, January 18th, we are going to have a lunch and learn workshop with the Arizona Department of Revenue to talk about transaction privilege tax errors and how to avoid them. As we're in tax season, either wrapping it up or as you're starting the new year. It's a great session by the Arizona Department of Revenue's education team to help small business owners understand transaction privilege tax or sales tax better and how to avoid some of those errors that commonly occur. So we've got those 2 great sessions planned. And we do have one not listed here, but on February 1st, we're going to have a lunch and learn with the IRS as well to look at some of the things that can help small businesses when it comes to federal taxes. So with that, we're going to look at this little small business feedback QR code. So if you have your phone with you, please take it out, scan the QR code. It's going to open up our chat bot, and you can go in there. If you select it, it'll give some questions for feedback. So this is not just for today's presentation, but for any of the presentations, any of the webinars you may have been part of, feel free to provide that feedback. We are looking forward to make 2024 boot camps even better. If we need to add more workshops or different topics that you might be interested in that you haven't seen, we want that information so we can provide the best, most relevant education for our small business owners in Arizona. So with that, we're going to jump into today's session. We have Dr. Adrian McIntyre. He's the principal of Speed and Story. We've got a great presentation from him today. So Adrian, I'm going to let you get into more details about who you are and what you do. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And while Adrian's pulling up his screen, we do want some housekeeping. If you have questions, please post those in the Q&A that you'll find at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see the Q&A box there, you might have to select more to see if there's anything else. But the Q&A, we like to post the questions there so we can use the chat for other interaction and not lose those questions amongst the chat. So with that, Adrian, it is all yours.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. So you should be able to see my screen here.
Yep.
This is an interesting presentation. It's one of my favorite subjects because we're talking about something that having more information about won't really help you. So I want to let you know up front, this is not the kind of thing where I have some sort of secret knowledge in my brain and in my slide deck. And by the end of this session, you're going to have taken that knowledge into your brain, and that's the thing that's going to get you sorted out. This is different. This is a skill set that you already have that I need to remind you that you have so you can use it to grow your business. So we're calling this build your owner brand with personal storytelling. And here's the crux of the problem. If you're a small business owner, you're a professional, you are a founder or entrepreneur of any kind, you probably have spent a lot of time and effort developing a product or service that's really great. And it would help a lot of people. And most people don't know that it exists, right? This is the crux of the problem that we need to address today. In fact, most people don't even know that you exist, right? Sad but true. So we're taking something to market and we have to battle against anonymity. We have to battle against invisibility. And in some cases, we have to battle against incoherence because even the people who do know you don't understand what it is that you do or how what you do or sell could help them solve a problem, make their life better, make it more fun and more interesting, or whatever it is. This is a communication problem. We sometimes call this marketing, but fundamentally, what we're talking about is human communication. And so we need to get rid of all the anonymity and invisibility and help you grow your reputation. And in this case, I'm going to talk about your personal reputation as an owner, as a professional, as a founder. And we're going to use the oldest technology available to human beings, storytelling. Now, there is a lot of talk out there about storytelling. And I just want to point out the irony that talking about story and story are never the same thing. They are two distinct phenomena, sort of like a firefly and a fire. They share four letters in common, but they're totally separate things, right? Separate impact, separate results. Here's the core premise of this talk and of all my work. From the campfire to the kitchen table to the company boardroom, stories are how human beings organize our minds and connect with one another. We have a unique form of narrative cognition. Our brains literally think through story. We connect with the world, we understand our place in it using this phenomenon called story. And knowing that is what I want to use to help you tell stories in a more impactful and powerful way. Second premise, your personal stories, you, the individual, the human being over there wearing your Snuggie or whatever you've got on. Your personal stories are the greatest untapped asset in your business, but nobody wants to hear them. This is the paradox that drives a lot of our work. How do we get people to connect with us when they don't really want to hear about us, right? The best way to build a memorable owner brand is to tell personal stories that aren't about you. Now, I've got to spend the rest of the hour I have with you making this make sense, okay? Because how can you tell personal stories, your unique personal experiences, things that actually happen to you in your life in a way that makes them not about you? That's what we're after. So when we talk about brand in this context, of course, we're talking about your reputation. I work with leaders, not logos. There are other people that can do your graphic design, that can build your website. This isn't that. I'm talking about the reputation that you have in the minds of the people out there. In most cases, you don't have one yet because you're not well known enough, but that's what we want to get to. That's what we want to build. Now, we have to understand that the storytelling we're talking about here takes place in three dimensions. We're pretty used to only thinking of it in the you to others dimension. So I tell my story to other people, and that's what we call storytelling. But the storytelling's happening in other ways as well. Most importantly, there's the story you're telling you about you. The 6 inches between your ears are some of the most treacherous real estate available because we don't often say nice things about ourselves to ourselves, about our past or things that have happened. But that's a key area where the storytelling is happening. And also others to others, talking about us, telling stories about us when we're not around. That's the pure definition of reputation. What do people say about you when you're not there? And we need to be able to work across all three of these dimensions. And we need to do it in a fairly sophisticated way. But I have some interesting thoughts on this matter. How do you teach a fish to swim? It's kind of a silly question, right? You don't have to teach fish to swim. They're fish. They swim. It's what fish do. The fish that's not swimming is sushi, right? So, how do you teach humans to tell stories? It's actually the same kind of question. You don't have to. Humans are native to story. Humans are born into story the way a fish is born into water. It's our natural environment. Story is to humans as water is to fish. Now, there's an interesting thing about this that's not immediately obvious. Fish never see water. They live their entire lives in water. What they can see is a function of the quality of the water that they're in. But fish don't see water, they see through water. And for the most part, we don't see story. We are immersed in it the way a fish is in water. We don't see the stories we're telling ourselves about ourselves, but what we see is a function of those stories. You follow me? So this is pretty profound. This goes to a fairly core level of what it is to be a human being. But this is the good news. You don't need an expert to teach you story. All human beings have native fluency in the language of story. When you were a young child, this was very natural to you. You made up stories about imaginary things. You told stories about yourself and what happened that day. So in many cases, the work I do with clients is to help them unlearn some of the habits that they've taken on as adults when we got a little more constrained, a little more careful, a little less open, and a little less willing to share stories with others. So we're not interested in you being an ordinary fish swimming around with all the others. We want you to be an extraordinary storyteller, a breakout storyteller. So we need to get you to a level of competency in some basic skills in order to do that. But this is your reminder that the storytelling is always already happening. And why I say this is in part because it keeps me humble. I mean, it's not like the storytelling starts when the consultant shows up, right? Or when the marketing team gets a budget to make a video, or when, you head off to a networking event to try to tell some people about what you're up to. The storytelling's already happening and always already happening. People are telling themselves stories about themselves, about their problems, about their life, about the people they like and the people they don't like. You're entering into a stream of story. We are immersed in a world of communication where we're always talking to ourselves and others all the time. So we need to get in the game and we need to elevate our ability to do that effectively. So these three dimensions of storytelling, you to you to others, and others to others, that's the terrain we want to play in as we build an owner brand, a personal brand, a reputation. All right. Now, I need you to understand one other core concept, and that is the storytelling triangle. This isn't something I created. This comes out of the story performance tradition, the Moth and things of that nature. But this is the basic idea that in this triangle, there is the story, the teller, and the audience. And all three of these things have a relationship with each other, and they interact and act on each other. This is a dynamic set of relationships, not a static one. So when you share a story, that story hopefully changes the audience in some way. And sometimes in the telling of the story itself changes. You have new insights, new realizations. It's not like you change the facts, but sometimes there's significance changes. And that can change you, and the audience's reaction can change you. And over time, all of it can change. And that's really what this is about. We're not doing storytelling to sort of create some static one-time thing. Again, this is for human leaders, not for logos. We're participating in this dynamic exchange of communication. Now, I learned this from this guy. This is my dad. quite a bit of time before he became my dad. My dad was the son of a preacher, and his grandfather was also a preacher. So I come from this long line of United Methodist ministers. My great grandfather was the kind of sort of turnaround pastor who would come into a failing congregation and get them whipped up into shape. But he was one of those fire and brimstone type guys that they couldn't keep around for more than 18 months because he started to really, you know, uh, rub people the wrong way. So they would send him on to the next church that needed to get fired up. His son, my grandfather, my dad's dad, was more of a community builder. He was a nurturing type of pastor. He would open new churches in places that hadn't had them before. In fact, I was born in California, but there was a period of time when they lived in Arizona and opened a church here in Maryvale. My dad was born into that tradition, but wanted no part of it. He didn't want to be a pastor, didn't want to work inside of a church. He loved the radio. And starting from a little young age, he would listen to this radio, he would play little records, and he started practicing to be a DJ. He would say things in between the songs and mix his favorite songs together. That's what he wanted to do. And in fact, that's the path he chose. And it took the form of essentially a small business. In 1971, I was -2. He took over a small college radio station with an annual budget of $3,500 to run the station for the entire year, right? So this is a lean budget. Now, his own salary was paid by the communication department at the college, but this is what he had to operate the thing, including hiring student employees to work there. They couldn't afford to stay on the air very long on that budget, so the radio station was only on the air from 3 p.m. till 10 p.m., 5 days a week. But he wanted this thing to be a major player in Southern California nonprofit radio. And so he started investing in technology and he started learning how to tell stories differently. And he got one of the first automation systems. This is before computers. There's not a computer in this thing, there's a bunch of relays and switches to start and stop tapes so he could keep the station running overnight with only one person in the building. And this is the environment that I grew up in, literally grew up in. In fact, right here where this arrow is pointing, behind the turntables was a little space, and I spent hours and hours in Studio A listening to my dad interview people, read the news and traffic, play music, and generally engage in the broadcast medium. But he also told stories. He would find people in the community who had interesting things going on. He would share their story. He was always trying to find the human dimension. And in fact, in 1978, now I'm 5, that's me on the left, he decides that our family should host a weekly children's storytelling show. So we had a studio at home. This picture happens to be in the radio station, but we had a recording studio in our house. And starting in 1978, we produced a weekly children's radio show in which our family, my mom and dad and my little sister and I, were the voices. We were the talent. And I watched this storytelling show begin to grow an audience for the radio station to the point where, in the peak of its career, 35 years into it, this station was doing over $1 million a year as an operating budget. And every one of those dollars was raised. It's a nonprofit station, so no ads, no commercials. Every one of those dollars was raised from individual listener donations. But you know what? I wasn't interested in the radio, at least not at the time. See, when my voice was on that show and I was 5, 6, and 7 years old, that was pretty cool. But when I was 25, 26, and 27, it was still playing in reruns. It started to be a little embarrassing and I wanted nothing to do with it. So I took my own communication skills and my own media background and went off in another direction. And I spent my 20s and 30s working primarily in the Middle East and Africa as a journalist, as a media spokesperson. I got a degree in cultural anthropology, then went on to do a master's in Arabic and Middle Eastern studies. This was before 9/11. And so I spent a lot of time working in difficult, challenging environments where language and story was part of my daily work. And then in 2004, a major turning point in my own life and also a major turning point in the region happened as a conflict began to break out in the Darfur region of Sudan. I was there. I was working for Oxfam at the time. And we began to hear stories of attacks on villages, militias and government helicopters raiding and burning and looting and killing. And a lot of horrible things were happening. Unfortunately, now almost 20 years later, this violence has not stopped. There's still conflict in Sudan. I saw a headline just this morning about 4.3 million people currently displaced there. But this is the story I was trying to tell. I was one of the first people in Darfur to try to get the word out. Of course, the government of Sudan did not want us to tell the truth of what was happening because they were funding the paramilitary militias that were burning these villages. But it was the individual stories, the weight of these things. I was interviewing people, I was hearing what was happening to them, I was gathering information, I was feeding it all back into our media and policy machine as a humanitarian organization. And it started to get to me because the stories we were telling didn't stop the war, didn't end the fighting, didn't create peace. And of course, having worked in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories and having worked in Iraq, this was familiar. I was getting tired of telling stories that made no difference. 20 years later, it brings me no joy to say we did not save Darfur. That was the rallying cry at the time. If anybody remembers, that's what college kids back here in the United States were marching and rallying for, and we failed. We did not stop that conflict. And I left Sudan, headed back to California, heartbroken, devastated, kind of existentially messed up in a variety of ways, because the stories that we had been telling, interviewed on the media, millions of people listening, and it made no difference. So it really had me start to question my work and what I wanted to do. And I ended up pivoting back into radio and doing other forms of professional work. So just for context here, I won't spend a lot of time on it, but my firm does a lot of media and story work. We do branded podcast production. We book people on podcast guest tours. We make thought leadership videos, a bunch of other creative content. We help them develop conversational campaigns. And whatever form this takes, we're still working in these 3 dimensions of storytelling. And you can too. You don't need us to do that. So that's what I want to focus on here in the rest of this presentation. How can you tap into the same sorts of things to change the conversation in ways that do make a difference? We didn't save Darfur, but when we help a business build a growth strategy and they start to see results, it may not happen tomorrow, but it can happen next month. And that's fulfilling for me in a way that those years of sort of war zone work unfortunately wasn't, even though I really wanted to make a difference there. So I am not going to go into the details of this, but I wanted to put it in here for context, because what I've developed over those years and the 15 years of practice in the realm of entrepreneurship, working with small businesses and entrepreneurial experts, is something I call the 6D storytelling system. And I just want you to see this so you get a sense of the components of it. We're going to focus on just one, but here's the big picture. So first, you need to discover your unique story print. Say more about that in a minute. Second, you need to define your story mark. It's like a trademark, but in the realm of story. Third, you need to develop your personal storytelling skills, and that's what we're going to do a deep dive into in the second half of this talk. Then you need to deepen your audience insights so you have more awareness of who you're talking to and how your stories are engaging with them. Design your reputation engine, which is a personal marketing strategy, essentially an owner brand execution, if you will. And then drive results and ROI through daily and weekly habits of conversations and content. That's the overall thing. I'm going to talk briefly about the first 2, but really dive deep into the third, because this is where I know you can take something away from this session and immediately put it into practice. You don't need to spend any money. You don't need to hire me or anyone else. You need to use the skills you already have that you may not have realized you could use in this way. All right. So what is a story print? When I started working specifically with entrepreneurs, with business owners, I realized that everyone had a unique way of getting to where they are, and that every human being has what I now call a story print. It's like a fingerprint. It's unique to you. It's mostly invisible, but it leaves a mark on everything you touch. It's formed of the things that happened in your life and the way you reacted to those things. And like a fingerprint, you need a set of tools to raise this up and make it visible, because it's mostly invisible. It's the water that you're swimming in. But once you see it, you could start to connect the dots in a whole different way. So your story print has what I call roots and routes, or roots and roots if you're British. Roots are your ancestry, your family history. Routes are the journeys that you've taken, the paths you've followed and not followed, the things that have led you to where you are today. We have a whole process for going through this with people. Can't spend any more time on it right now. And in fact, it only really works one-on-one anyway. The second phase of this is developing your story mark. So with all that background, with that bit of the iceberg that's under the surface, the story print is the invisible stuff, you can start to select your story mark. What do you want to be known for? What are the key messages and signature stories? I call the messages sound bites. What are the sound bites and stories that other people will know about you and can repeat about you when you're not around? It's like your trademark, but it's not an elevator pitch. It's not a script. It's the kind of things that help position you in somebody's mind. I just quickly want to show you what they are. Again, we can't do a deep dive on this part, but I want you to have the information. If you need to watch this back and press pause or whatever, it's totally fine. So the sound bites are who I am, who I serve, what I solve, when it matters, why I started, and what I stand for. So this is messaging, really. This is having clear, simple building blocks for conversation that you can sort of put together in different ways depending on who you're talking to, and that you can use as a tool to ask better questions of people that you're interacting with, whether it's a customer in a brick and mortar store, whether it's a client in a professional firm, whether it's somebody else at a networking event. When you start to ask people about who they serve, the problems they solve, when does it really matter that you solve those problems? When is it urgent? Why did you start? How'd you get into this, etc.? You start to get a sense of who they are, not what they do. And that's the most important thing. All right. So I've been moving quickly, but that's only to get us to here, because this is where the work of this presentation really lives. All right. The third thing in the 6D system is develop your personal storytelling skills. Again, I believe every one of us has native fluency in the language of story, but we may not have been practicing those skills at the same level. Certainly somebody like me who's been interviewed hundreds and hundreds of times for millions and millions of listeners, since I was 5, has a different set of practices, but that doesn't mean I have any different ability. This is the critical thing I need you to understand. You were born with the same equipment as every other gifted communicator on earth, and you find your way to use it. And that's the unlock that starts to get you the reputation, the owner brand that really begins to make a difference. So the first thing I want to say about this is, just to scale this properly, the stories we tell must always be the right size. And I don't just mean like physically fit on the screen of a mobile phone, although of course we all know that mobile is the new word of mouth, and pretty much what we know about others happens on, little screens like this. But I mean the size of the story in terms of the sort of scale of it. We often think that personal storytelling means tell my story. And unfortunately, I did a version of that just now in this talk, but I had a little bit more permission because I've got an hour with you. But it doesn't have to mean that. In fact, there is a spectrum that all stories fall on. And let me show you where you need to lie on this spectrum. On the one end, you have epic stories, and on the other end, you have everyday stories. Epics are things like The Hero's Journey, which you've undoubtedly heard about. By the way, a terrible framework for personal storytelling. You heard it here first. I've been saying it for almost a decade. Great for understanding comparative mythology, not good for talking about yourself. Myths and legends, folk tales, etc. Little Red Riding Hood, Star Wars, all that stuff, Harry Potter, that's epic, right? On the everyday side, I'm pushing the wrong button. On the everyday side are the things like anecdotes, happenings, little examples, little illustrations, this time when type of stories. And this is the sweet spot for personal storytelling. Almost never do you have permission to go into an entire life story. I did a little bit and I tried to keep it short. It was probably like 6.5 or 7 minutes. If you're doing a keynote, maybe you get 12 minutes for sort of an epic, my life was great, then I ended up in the gutter, then I found redemption, and then, I got everything I ever wanted, or whatever. That's also a terrible framework for a story, but hey. So you need to understand that your stories are going to be small. They're going to be something that happened at a specific place and time. Now I want to show you the structure of one of those stories, an anecdote. Okay. This is the secret sauce. This is the magic. If there's one thing that I have in this talk that I need you to understand, it's the 3-part story formula. Okay. Every great story has this: a beginning, a middle, and wait for it, an end. All right. That's not the secret part. That's the obvious part. All right. But truly, bad stories don't have a beginning, don't have a middle, and they never end. And then, we can't do that. The secret is what goes at the beginning, what goes in the middle, and what goes at the end. So let me stop being cheeky and get on with that. Every story happens somewhere, some when, to someone. All right. So the beginning of a personal anecdote is literally just that. You saying where and when this was and who was there. All right. That sort of announces, without you having to say it, that it's a story. When I was 5 years old, my dad decided to write the script for what would become the Happy Day Express, a children's radio program that we recorded every week in our home studio. And I give you a lot of details about it, but that located the beginning of that story, right? Now, this is where it gets good, because an anecdote, and I haven't shared one of these yet, I realize, an anecdote has a middle, and that middle is what happened. But what happened has an internal dimension to it and an external dimension to it. The external is, she said, I did, this happened. The internal is what that was like, what was going on for you emotionally, what were you thinking? That's all part of what happened. And every good story has, as its core ingredient in the middle, some tension. Story without tension is not interesting. Going to the grocery store, parking in your usual spot, walking inside, picking up a half gallon of almond milk or whatever your thing is, walking to the counter, using the self-checkout, paying for it, walking back to your car and driving home is a sequence of events, but it's not a great story. There's no tension. Nothing happened. Right? Well, stuff happened, but no tension happened. So let's unpack this a little bit, because there's more to it. Every story, every good personal story should have some kind of conflict. It doesn't mean like, good versus evil. I mean, sometimes it does. But maybe there's just a dilemma. It's an internal conflict. You can't decide what to do. Maybe there's an actual crisis. Something is happening and it has to be dealt with. Maybe it's just an obstacle that has to be overcome. Something is in the way of getting something that you want, and you have to figure out how to deal with that. Or there's a breakdown. Things aren't going the way they're supposed to go. This is not supposed to be happening. This is not good. The middle of a great personal anecdote will have some version of that. There's a challenge that has to be overcome. And then the end is, not too surprisingly, the outcome, the insight that you had, the decision that you made, the lesson that you learned, the new direction that you took. And here's the real secret, okay? All kidding aside, what makes these personal anecdotes not about you is when the insights and the lessons and the outcomes reveal something about human nature. When people can hear themselves in that, not the circumstances, not the what happened, but they're like, oh, I've been there. I had something like that. Oh, wow. I can't believe you're admitting that part of it. I went through that, but never said that part out loud. This is what connects us together. When we hear ourselves in other people's unique personal stories, we get new insights into the human condition. And that is what makes stories such a powerful bonding force for human beings. So you need to share your personal experiences in a way that has some insight about humanity, about the human condition, about what it's like to be a person. Okay. I've got some examples to show you that. But first, I want to use one of our classic stories, and it's the right time of year for it anyway. How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Let's just look at that structure and see if how this matches up. Okay. So, right from the beginning, you know the story. Every Who down in Whoville liked Christmas a lot, but the Grinch, who lived just north of Whoville, did not. First sentence of the book. Somewhere just north of Whoville. Some when? Christmas time. And also the fairy tale Once Upon a Time, Never Neverland, that kind of timeless time. Your personal stories are going to have an actual time. Back in 98, or when I was just about to graduate from high school, or 2 years after my divorce, or last month when right, they'll have some actual time. But here it's Christmas. So we got the Who's, or the Who, funny that, the Where, Whoville, and just north of it, and the time, the when. Now, notice how even in the first sentence, Dr. Seuss has the conflict already going. The Who's liked Christmas a lot, but the Grinch did not. Sets up the conflict that's going to be the whole story right there in the beginning. Okay. So it begins somewhere, some when, and it's happening to someone, the Grinch and these Who's. The middle is going to be about this conflict. We all know, or I think we know, what happens there. And the end is the insight that the Grinch has. Maybe, I forget exactly how it goes. Maybe Christmas isn't about the stuff from the store. Maybe it's about something more, right? Something to that effect. Okay. Now that's good for Dr. Seuss, but what about a real life example of this? This is one of my favorite ones, and I read this in every workshop that we do, and I don't do a lot of webinars like this on this topic, but I'm going to read it here as well. Walt Bettinger is the CEO of Charles Schwab, so largest financial services company in the world in terms of assets under management, et cetera, et cetera. He's been the CEO since 2008. In 2016, he was interviewed in the New York Times by a writer named Adam Bryant, and the writer asked him a few questions. Tell me about your early influences. How did your parents shape your leadership style, et cetera? And then he asks a question, and the answer to the question is such a perfect example of the anecdote I'm encouraging you to develop and tell. So I just want to read this to you straight from the article. Adam Bryant asks Walt Bettinger, "What about lessons you learned in college?" A business strategy course in my senior year stands out. I had maintained a 4.0 average all the way through, and I wanted to graduate with a perfect average. Notice he's already setting up what might happen. It came down to the final exam, and I had spent many hours studying and memorizing formulas to do calculations for the case studies. The teacher handed out the final exam. This is the external events. And it was on one piece of paper, which really surprised me because I figured it would be a lot longer than that. Once everyone had their paper, he said, "Go ahead and turn it over." Both sides were blank. And the professor said, "I've taught you everything I can teach you about business in the last 10 weeks. But the most important message, the most important question is this: what's the name of the lady who cleans this building?" And that had a powerful impact. It was the only test I ever failed. And I got the B that I deserved. Her name was Dottie, and I didn't know Dottie. I'd seen her, but I'd never taken the time to ask her name. I've tried to know every Dottie I've worked with ever since. It was just a great reminder of what really matters in life, and that you should never lose sight of the people who do the real work. One paragraph. Starts somewhere, senior year of college, has some tension in the middle. Test was handed out, it was blank. There was one question. What's the name of the woman who cleans this building? He failed the exam, got a B in the class. And the lesson is something that we can all learn from. The people who matter are the people who do the work, not the people necessarily in the C-suite, not the people at the front of the room, not the professor. And that's a lesson that we can all carry with us. It has me think about all the places I've been where I take people for granted. It has me question whether or not I'm really living true to my own commitment to listen to people and know them and share their stories. It reminds me of all the nameless, faceless people that I didn't get to talk to when I was working in Darfur and other conflict zones, whose stories won't get told. It reminds me of what really matters. Okay, pretty powerful stuff. And here's what makes this whole thing work. It's something John Steinbeck, a great storyteller, wrote about a while back. If a story is not about the hearer, not the teller, he or she will not listen. A great, lasting story is about everyone, or it will not last. The strange and foreign is not interesting, only the deeply personal and familiar. When we listen to stories, we're listening for what's familiar, even when the circumstances are different. Even when we can't relate to the what happened, we can hear the humanity in the story. All right, we're moving quickly toward the end of the session. I want to give you some very practical tools here. So, which stories should I tell? Man, I've lived a life. I've had some great things that happen. I've had some terrible things that happen. I've had some real rough things that have happened. By the way, one of the reasons why the story print process takes a longer time and works best one-on-one is because most people start out doing this kind of excavation, sort of archaeology of their own personal history, stuck with a couple of stories. I often say we all have so many things we can't remember because there's a few things we can't forget. And sometimes those are the right stories to share publicly, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes you're not ready. Sometimes it's still too raw. Sometimes it's not appropriate for a variety of situations. And I got all the room in the world for that. So what stories should you tell? Well, I don't have an equation, like a rule, but remember how these start. If your story starts when I was, that's going to give you a clue because you're now going to go looking for anecdotes, events, moments in time. And there's two tools that we use to do this. And I want to show them both to you, even though we don't have time for you to work through them. Please, you'll have the PDF of this. You can print them off and do this work yourself if you like. The first tool is something I call the story path. You literally put a start date and an end date, and you use one page for every decade of your life and just start marking the turning points, major events, things that happened, when something changed, etc., and then start to fill in the gaps. As you work with this and over time, when you're in the shower, when you're driving, when you're thinking about something else, you will start to remember, oh, that moment in the 6th grade when Mrs. Manning busted me climbing in the window. I forgot about that until I started filling out the thing, et cetera, et cetera. The second tool I call the scene finder, because remember, what we're looking for is a specific scene, a moment in time, where and when something happened. And so how do you look for a scene? Well, you start with a site. So we're going to go from sites to scenes. Sites are, sites of memory, right? People, places, things. Remember the definition of nouns? So just start remembering at a critical point in your life. Could be this year, could be when you were 6. Doesn't matter. Who was there? Make a list of the people that were in your life in that moment. Make a list of the places: my bedroom, the classroom, the street outside, the neighborhood, right? The thrifty ice cream store, whatever, all that stuff. And then things. There's some things that spark memories, and from those things you can remember moments or scenes. Okay, so just giving this to you. Have to unfortunately keep moving quickly here, but these two tools, the story path method and the scene finder method, can help you begin to hone in on moments. And they don't all have to be like, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, but they can be. The question is, can you find in it a lesson, an insight, a decision that you can share with other people? Now, here is the key ingredient in a great personal story. It is the truth. This is the thing that we typically don't want to say out loud because we'd rather pretend that we had it all together. And of course we didn't, because we're people. The truth is such a powerful sentence to put in there. It's essentially like Walt Bettinger saying, the truth is, I had never paid any attention to the woman cleaning the building. I saw her, but the truth is, I didn't think she was important enough to talk to. Right? He didn't say that explicitly. Could have been better if he did. So to find the truth, I encourage you to look for F words. So first times often don't go well. Things that you were afraid of, fractures, time when you experienced something that broke. Could be a relationship, could be a thing. I've got a great anecdote about the fourth grade, and I broke Eustace Pennycook's glass jar that was in his lunchbox. False starts. This is when you thought something was going to be a big deal. You headed down that path. It turned out not to work. You had to abandon it early on. Forks, like splits in the road. This could be a tough decision or a dilemma. The options that you had, do I do this? Do I do that? Fiascos and F-ups, you can get the story there. Major blunders or failures. We've all had them. Huge mistakes that we've made, things that we were embarrassed by at the time, something that we had to take responsibility for, a mess we had to clean up. Favors, when, hey, we weren't the strongest person in the situation, but somebody else did us a favor, cut us some slack, or helped us out, even though we didn't really deserve it. Flare-ups are like moments of crisis, a sudden challenge, or something you had to deal with in the moment. Failures are obvious. Futility, hey, when did you give up on something? You tried it, didn't work, and you had to give up. You realized it was futile or futile. And then what did you learn from that? Forgiveness is a big one. When did you have to ask somebody else to forgive you for a mistake that you've made? When you can tell stories about these kind of things, you can position yourself as somebody who is really standing true to their values, to their commitments, and showing themselves to the world. The work that I do isn't for people with big egos and narcissistic tendencies who just want to be more known. The work I do is for people who want to be known for their kindness, for their humanity, for their hard-won experiences, which means a lot of skin knees along the way. So if you want to be known for your values, find ways to show them in practice. I'm going to end here with this one quick anecdote that I heard on a podcast interview. There was a woman who owned a pet sitting and dog walking business. And one day she lost one of her clients' dogs. It's probably the worst thing that could actually happen to somebody who's responsible for somebody's most beloved pet, right? Dog got out, got into some wooded area, and was just gone. They couldn't find the dog for days. And she called the owner immediately. The owner was out of town on vacation. The owner came back, and together they were working, trying to find the dog. This woman later shared how she had walked almost 20 miles every single day down the path, through the woods, all around. They called the zoo to get some advice for how to find lost animals. They called every other dog walker in the area who knew the terrain and who could help them find the dog. And they did. They found the dog. That part of the story has a happy ending. The part I wanted to share with you, though, is that she decided to tell the whole story publicly. She wrote a blog post about it and she shared it on Facebook. This is a few years ago. She could have tried to cover this up. I mean, after all, losing a dog that you're being paid to care for is not good, right? But she told the truth. She explained the whole thing. She shared her process. There are more details than I have time to explain to you now. And she demonstrated by doing that what she really believes in. She believes in the truth. She believes in great customer service. She believes in going the last mile. She believes in community, and she saw it through to the very end. As a result of sharing what could have been seen by somebody as a major F word, right? Her business boomed. She had people writing on her Facebook comments page and then on her Yelp and on other, I don't know if Google listings was at the time or not, saying things like, this is exactly the kind of person that I want to take care of my dog. Can seeing what she went through and stuff. Hiding the truth is never a good idea. Embracing it is the way to go. And I'll end here with a quote from Mother Teresa, who said, I alone cannot change the world. I unfortunately learned that the hard way. But I can cast a stone across the waters to create many ripples. And my slight modification, I have her permission, of course, to do this, is that I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a story across the waters to create many ripples. That's the core of the presentation. I'd love there to be an opportunity at another time to talk about your stories. If you can take what's in here and run with it, amazing. If you want to reach out to me and have a chat about anything that was provoked by this presentation, I'm more than happy to do that. I make myself available for a zero-cost clarity call. I will talk to anybody about this topic. It's not a sales thing. Sometimes people really need to work through something that they're not sure if it's right or not, and I'd be happy to have that conversation with you if that would be helpful. My information is here on the screen, and it will also be in the PDF that you can download at the end of this session. Thank you so much, and I'm going to stay on and answer some questions.
Hey, Adrian, let's go back to that other screen with your contact. We'll leave that up. So do we have any questions for Adrian? One, this was a fabulous storytelling presentation. We've had a few on in the past, and this had a lot of great stuff. We will be posting this recording in our content library in the next day or two, and we're going to have a PDF version of the presentation, so you can get those templates that Adrian referenced. So that's real important to know that you'll be able to access that stuff and work through some of those exercises to help remember some of those turning points and some of the scenes and stories and people that influenced your personal story. So we just got a comment from Kelly posted in the Q&A. This was fantastic. Thank you. So thank you, Kelly, for making that comment. Again, I don't see any questions, and we are right at time. So Adrian, thank you so much for this presentation. It was excellent. I hope everybody got some positive information out of it and can apply it to your business. Over the holidays, I'm sure you're going to have some stories that are going to be created. We're all creating them every day, as mentioned. So hopefully you can have some that you can share, whether it's with friends, family, work, and creating that story for your personal brand. Any last minute comments, Adrian, before we wrap up?
Cassandra asks a really serious and substantive question about telling the truth about Native American genocide and forced assimilation. I do have thoughts about that. I'd be happy to chat with you. It would take more than the 1 minute that we have here. It's a serious and important topic.
All right. So Cassandra, you can reach out directly to Adrian about that. And with that, we will go ahead and wrap up. We appreciate everybody being with us today in our final session for 2023. We did definitely end it with a great topic and a great presentation. So we're very appreciative, Adrian, for being here with us. We hope everybody has a happy holidays and enjoy the time. And we look forward to seeing everybody on January 9th for our next boot camp to start off our 2024 series. So again, thank you very much, and have a great week and great holiday season. Thank you.